The stagecoach was supposed to arrive at 3 o'clock, and Katherine Novak had been standing at the dusty crossroads outside Independence, California since 2:30, her carpetbag growing heavier by the minute as the September sun beat down mercilessly on her dark bonnet. It was 1872, and she had traveled all the way from Sacramento to take a teaching position at the small schoolhouse, only to find herself stranded when the stage that was meant to carry her the final 15 miles into town simply never appeared. The road stretched empty in both directions, flanked by scrubby sage and the distant promise of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And as the shadows began to lengthen and the air took on that particular quality of approaching evening, Katherine felt the first flutter of real panic in her chest. She had spent nearly all her money on the journey west. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving her alone in the world with nothing but a teaching certificate and the determination to make something of herself. The position in Independence had seemed like Providence, a small salary but room and board included, and she had written ahead to confirm her arrival. Someone was supposed to meet her at the junction. Someone was supposed to care that she had come all this way. But the road remained empty, and the sun continued its inexorable descent toward the horizon. Katherine set her bag down and rubbed her aching arms, scanning the landscape for any sign of civilization. There was nothing but wilderness, the kind of raw, untamed country that both thrilled and terrified her Eastern sensibilities. She had grown up in Philadelphia before moving to Sacramento with her father, and even Sacramento had felt frontier enough. This was something else entirely, a place where the modern world seemed to have barely made a dent in the ancient rocks and endless sky. She was just considering whether she should start walking, despite having no idea which direction might actually lead to town, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leaped, and she turned to see a rider approaching from the north, silhouetted against the golden light. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A tall man on a paint horse, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the glare. He slowed as he approached, and Katherine felt suddenly conscious of how she must look, travel-worn and desperate, standing alone at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere. The rider pulled up a few yards away, and she got her first good look at him. He was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25 to her 22 years, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that looked almost amber in the late afternoon light. There was something careful in the way he held himself, as though he was aware of being a stranger and didn't want to startle her. "You look like you are waiting for something," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle, with a faint accent she could not quite place. Not quite Spanish, but something in that direction. "The stage," Katherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It was supposed to be here hours ago. I am meant to be in Independence." The rider pushed his hat back slightly, studying her with an expression that might have been concern. "The Independence stage does not run this route anymore. Has not for 3 weeks now. The company folded." Katherine felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. "But I rode ahead. I told them when I would arrive." "Mail can take a while to catch up out here," he said, not unkindly. "And even when it does, sometimes the news it carries is already old." He glanced at the sky, then back at her. "You planning to stand here all night?" "I do not have much choice," Katherine said, and was horrified to hear her voice crack slightly. She swallowed hard, determined not to cry in front of this stranger. "I do not suppose you know if there is another way to get to town." The rider was quiet for a moment, and she could see him weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said, "I am heading that direction myself." "You can ride with me if you want. I will take you home." Katherine's first instinct was to refuse. Every lesson of propriety she had ever learned screamed that riding off into the wilderness with a strange man was the height of foolishness. But the alternative was spending the night alone at this crossroads, and she was practical enough to know which option was more dangerous. Besides, there was something in the man's eyes that made her think he was offering help without any strings attached, a kind of straightforward decency that she had learned to recognize in her years of dealing with people. "That is very kind of you," she said carefully. "I do not want to impose." "No imposition," he said, and swung down from his horse with an easy grace. "I am Vincent Navarro. I have a ranch about 8 miles west of Independence. I come through this way once a month or so to check on the grazing lands." "Katherine Novak," she said, and offered her hand. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked hard for his living. "I am the new school teacher, or I am supposed to be." "Well, Miss Novak, I reckon the town will be glad to see you," Vincent said. He picked up her carpet bag as though it weighed nothing and secured it behind his saddle. "You ever ridden double before?" "Not since I was a child," Katherine admitted. "It is not so hard. I will help you up and you just hold on." He demonstrated where she should sit, behind the saddle, and then held out his hand. Katherine took a deep breath and accepted his help. It was awkward at first, arranging her skirts and finding her balance, but Vincent was patient and kept a steady hand on her elbow until she was settled. Then he swung up in front of her, moving with the kind of unconscious skill that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "You are going to want to hold on to me," he said over his shoulder. "The trail gets rough in places." Katherine hesitated only a moment before wrapping her arms around his waist. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, the play of muscles as he adjusted the reins. It was startlingly intimate, and she felt her cheeks heat despite the cooling air. "Ready?" he asked, and without waiting for an answer, he nudged the horse into a gentle walk. They rode in silence for a while, following a trail that Katherine would never have spotted on her own. The land rolled away on either side of them, painted in shades of gold and purple as the sun sank lower. Despite her exhaustion and uncertainty, she found herself captivated by the beauty of it, the vast openness that seemed to go on forever. "You came a long way to teach school," Vincent said after a time, breaking the comfortable quiet. "I came from Sacramento," Katherine said. "Originally from Philadelphia, but we moved west when I was 16. My father and I, he was a clerk. He passed away this spring." She was surprised at how steady her voice remained. The grief was still there, a constant ache beneath her ribs, but she had learned to carry it. "I am sorry," Vincent said, and it sounded like he meant it. "It is hard to lose family." "Do you have family here?" Katherine asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly because she did not want to dwell on her own losses. "Some," Vincent said. "My parents have a ranch about a day's ride south. I bought my own place 3 years ago. It is small, but it is mine." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. "That must have taken a lot of work." "Everything worth having does," Vincent said simply. They rode on as the light faded, and Katherine found herself relaxing incrementally. Vincent kept the horse to an easy pace, mindful of her inexperience, and he seemed to have an innate sense of the landscape, navigating around obstacles she could barely see in the dimness. Once, he pointed out a small herd of antelope in the distance, their white rumps flashing as they bounded away. Another time, he stopped to let the horse drink from a tiny creek that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly into the dry ground. "We will reach town just after dark," he said as they continued. "Are you staying at the boarding house?" "I was told there were quarters attached to the schoolhouse," Katherine said, "but I suppose I do not know if anyone there is expecting me tonight. Mrs. Henderson runs the school board." "I can take you to her house. She will know what to do with you." "Thank you," Katherine said, and meant it. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." "Someone would have found you eventually," Vincent said, "but I am glad it was me." There was something in the way he said it that made Katherine's heart give an odd little skip. She told herself firmly that it was just relief and exhaustion playing tricks on her, that she had no business reading anything into the kindness of a stranger. But she could not quite ignore the way her arms fit around his waist, or the way his warmth seemed to seep into her in the cooling evening air. As promised, they reached Independence just as full dark settled over the land. Katherine had expected something rough and temporary, perhaps a collection of tents and false-fronted buildings. But Independence proved to be a real town, with proper streets and houses that looked like they had been standing for years. Lamplight glowed in windows, and she could hear the sound of a piano playing somewhere, accompanied by laughter and conversation. Vincent guided the horse through the streets with the ease of familiarity, finally stopping in front of a neat white house with a picket fence. "This is the Henderson place," he said, swinging down and then reaching up to help Katherine dismount. Her legs wobbled alarmingly when her feet hit the ground, and he kept a steadying hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Thank you," she said again, feeling inadequate. "I do not know how to repay you for your help." "No need," Vincent said. He retrieved her carpetbag and handed it to her, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Welcome to Independence, Miss Novak. I hope the town treats you well." He was turning to go when the front door of the house opened and a woman appeared, backlit by the warm glow from inside. "Vincent Navarro, is that you?" she called. "What brings you to town at this hour?" "Evening, Mrs. Henderson," Vincent said, touching the brim of his hat. "I found your new schoolteacher stranded at the crossroads. Thought you would want to know she arrived." Mrs. Henderson, a sturdy woman with iron gray hair and sharp eyes, came down the walk to peer at Katherine. "Miss Novak, good heavens, child, we expected you days ago. When you did not arrive, we feared you had changed your mind." "The stage never came," Katherine explained. "I did not know the line had closed." "Those scoundrels," Mrs. Henderson said with feeling. "They took our money for another 3 months of service. Well, no matter. You are here now, and that is what counts." She turned to Vincent. "You will stay for supper, of course. It is the least we can do." "I should be getting back," Vincent said, but Mrs. Henderson was already shaking her head. "Nonsense. You rode all this way out of your way, and Martha has a roast on. I will not hear of you leaving without a proper meal." She took Katherine's arm with surprising strength. "Come along, dear. You look done in. And you, Vincent, put that horse in the barn and come inside before I take a switch to you." Vincent caught Katherine's eye and gave her a small, rueful smile that transformed his face completely. For the first time, she saw past the dust and the weariness to the man beneath, and felt something shift in her chest, something warm and dangerous. "Yes, madam," he said meekly, and led his horse away. Inside, the Henderson house was everything Katherine could have hoped for, warm and clean and smelling of good food. Mrs. Henderson introduced her to her husband, a quiet man with kind eyes, and their daughter Martha, who turned out to be close to Katherine's own age and was responsible for the excellent roast that graced the dinner table. Vincent joined them shortly after, having seen to his horse, and Katherine found herself seated across from him at the big kitchen table. The meal was delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. The Hendersons wanted to know everything about Katherine's journey and her qualifications, and she found herself telling them about her education, her years helping her father, and her determination to make a life for herself in the West. Vincent mostly listened, but occasionally he would add a quiet observation that made everyone laugh or nod in agreement. Katherine noticed that the Hendersons treated him with real warmth, not as a hired hand or an outsider, but as a valued member of the community. "Vincent was one of our best students," Mrs. Henderson said at one point, beaming at him. "Before my arthritis got too bad and I had to give up teaching, he could have been anything he wanted, but he chose ranching." "I like working with my hands," Vincent said, not defensively but as simple fact. "And I like the land." "Nothing wrong with that," Mr. Henderson said. "Takes all kinds to make a town." After dinner, Mrs. Henderson insisted that Katherine stay the night with them rather than opening up the schoolhouse in the dark. Martha showed her to a small guest room and brought her warm water for washing, chattering cheerfully about the town and its inhabitants. Katherine learned that Independence had about 300 residents, that there was a mercantile, a church, a saloon, and a livery stable, and that the school served about 20 children ranging from 6 to 14 years old. "You will do wonderfully," Martha said warmly. "The children are good kids, mostly. A few rascals, but nothing you cannot handle, and everyone is so excited to have a real teacher again. It has been nearly 6 months since Miss Peterson left to get married." When Martha finally left her alone, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed and let herself absorb everything that had happened. This morning she had been a stranger in a strange land, scared and alone. Now she had a place to sleep, a job waiting for her, and the memory of a man's warm eyes and steady hands. She thought about Vincent riding home alone in the dark and hoped he would be safe. She did not see him again for nearly a week. Mrs. Henderson took her to the schoolhouse the next morning and helped her settle into the small apartment attached to the back. 2 rooms that were plainly furnished but clean and adequate. The school board had arranged for basic supplies to be delivered, and Katherine threw herself into preparation, scrubbing the schoolroom until it gleamed, organizing the slate boards and chalk, and reviewing the curriculum materials that had been left by her predecessor. The children arrived on Monday morning, a mixed group ranging from tiny 6-year-olds clutching lunch pails to gangly teenagers who towered over her. Katherine had been nervous, but she found that teaching came naturally to her, that she genuinely liked the children and enjoyed the challenge of keeping them all engaged and learning. By the end of the first week, she felt like she was beginning to find her footing. It was on Saturday, when she was in the mercantile buying supplies for the coming week, that she ran into Vincent again. She was debating between 2 different types of writing paper when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "The heavier stock will last longer, but the children might find it harder to write on." She turned to find Vincent standing a polite distance away, hat in hand, looking slightly awkward. Her heart did that odd little skip again, and she had to remind herself to breathe normally. "Mr. Navarro," she said, pleased that her voice came out steady. "I have been hoping to see you again. I wanted to thank you properly for your help." "Vincent, please," he said, "and there is no need to thank me. I was happy to help." "Well, I am grateful nonetheless," Katherine said. She gestured to the paper. "Do you have children? Is that how you know about the writing paper?" "No children," Vincent said, and was that a faint flush on his cheeks. "But I remember being a student. The thick paper always made my hand cramp." Katherine smiled. "The lighter paper it is, then." She made her selection and added it to her basket, along with ink, chalk, and a few other necessities. "Are you in town often?" "Once a week or so, usually, to pick up supplies and conduct business." He hesitated, then said, "There is a dance at the church hall next Saturday, a harvest celebration. I was wondering if you might like to attend." Katherine's breath caught. She had been asked to dances before, of course, but somehow this felt different, more significant. "I would like that very much," she said. The smile that spread across Vincent's face was worth every moment of nervousness. "May I call for you at 7? 7 would be perfect. They stood there for a moment, just smiling at each other like fools, until the mercantile owner cleared his throat meaningfully, and they both remembered where they were. Vincent touched his hat brim in farewell and went to conduct his own business, but Katherine caught him glancing her way more than once as she completed her purchases. The week that followed seemed to drag endlessly. Katherine threw herself into her teaching, but her mind kept wandering to Saturday evening. Martha Henderson, who seemed to have developed an uncanny ability to sense romantic intrigue, appeared at the schoolhouse on Friday evening with an armload of dresses. "You cannot wear that plain gray thing to a dance," she announced, sweeping in without preamble. "Not when Vincent Navarro is escorting you." "How did you know about that?" Katherine asked, though she was secretly pleased to have someone to share her excitement with. "Everyone knows," Martha said cheerfully. "This is a small town and Vincent never invites anyone to dances. Half the girls in Independence have been trying to catch his eye for years." She held up a dress in deep blue cotton. "This one will bring out your eyes." Katherine let herself be fussed over, trying on dresses and submitting to Martha's opinions on her hair. By the time Martha left, she had borrowed the blue dress and a cream-colored shawl, and had received detailed instructions on how to arrange her dark hair in a style that was both fashionable and practical. When Vincent arrived on Saturday evening, Katherine was as ready as she would ever be. She opened the door to find him standing on her small porch, wearing clean trousers and a white shirt that made his sun-darkened skin look even warmer. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her blush. "Thank you," she said. "You look very nice yourself." He offered his arm, and they walked together through the evening streets to the church hall. Katherine could feel people watching them, could sense the whispers and curious glances, but she found she did not mind. There was something solid and reassuring about Vincent's presence beside her, the way he matched his longer stride to hers, the polite greetings he offered to everyone they passed. The church hall was already crowded when they arrived, and a fiddle band was tuning up in the corner. Long tables held food contributed by various families, and the whole space glowed with lamplight and good cheer. Mrs. Henderson spotted them immediately and came bustling over. "Miss Novak, how lovely you look, and Vincent, I swear you get more handsome every time I see you." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "You two make a fine couple, just fine." Katherine felt her cheeks heat, but Vincent just smiled and led her onto the dance floor as the music started. She had learned to dance as a girl, but it had been years since she had done so, and she was nervous about remembering the steps. Vincent seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Just follow my lead," he said softly. "I will not let you stumble," and he did not. He was a good dancer, confident without being showy, and he held her at a respectful distance while still making her feel secure in his arms. As they moved through the patterns of the dance, Katherine found herself relaxing, enjoying the music and the movement and the feeling of being part of something larger than herself. "You dance well," she said during a break in the music. "My mother insisted all her children learn," Vincent said. She said dancing was a mark of civilization and she was not raising savages. His tone was affectionate, and Katherine found herself wanting to know more about his family. "How many siblings do you have?" "3 sisters and 2 brothers. I am the second oldest," he smiled. "They are all married now except for my youngest sister, Maria. She is 16 and convinced she is going to die an old maid because no one in our valley is interesting enough for her." Katherine laughed. "She sounds spirited." "That is one word for it," Vincent said dryly. "My mother uses others." They danced several more sets, and between dances, Vincent introduced her to what seemed like half the town. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and Katherine began to feel like she might actually belong here, might actually be able to make a life in this place. When they finally took a break to get some refreshment, Vincent guided her to a quieter corner where they could talk without shouting over the music. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, handing her a cup of punch. "Very much," Katherine said honestly. "Everyone has been so kind. I was worried about being an outsider, but people seem willing to accept me." "That is the way here," Vincent said. "If you are willing to work hard and treat people fairly, they will do the same for you." He paused, then added, "And it does not hurt that the children already adore you." "I have heard nothing but praise for the new teacher." "How would you know what the children think?" Katherine asked, curious. "I have a niece in your school, Elena, my oldest sister's daughter. She comes home every day talking about Miss Novak this and Miss Novak that. According to her, you are the smartest and prettiest teacher in the whole world." Katherine felt absurdly pleased. "Elena is a wonderful student, very bright and eager to learn." "She takes after her mother," Vincent said. "My sister Rosa was always the clever one in our family." They talked for a long time, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Vincent told her about his ranch, how he had saved for years to buy the land, how he was slowly building up his herd and improving the property. Katherine told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, her father's quiet determination to give her an education, her own dreams of making a difference in young lives. She found herself sharing things she had not told anyone else, and Vincent listened with an attention that made her feel heard and valued. When the dance finally ended and Vincent walked her home, Katherine felt like she was floating. The night was cool and clear, with stars scattered like diamonds across the black sky. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden sidewalks, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. "I had a wonderful time," Katherine said when they reached her door. "So did I," Vincent said. He hesitated, and in the moonlight she could see him struggling with something. "Miss Novak, Katherine, I hope you will not think me too forward, but I would very much like to see you again. Perhaps we could have dinner sometime, or I could show you more of the area." "I would like that," Katherine said softly. "Very much." His smile was like the sun coming out. "Sunday, I could pick you up after church and we could have a picnic. There is a place I want to show you if you trust me." "I trust you," Katherine said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. She barely knew this man, but something in her recognized something in him, a fundamental decency and kindness that went bone deep. "Sunday, then," Vincent said. He took her hand and raised it briefly to his lips, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfect. "Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Vincent." She watched him walk away into the darkness, then went inside to her small rooms. She lay awake for a long time that night, replaying every moment of the evening, every word and gesture and smile. She told herself she was being foolish, that she had known him for barely 2 weeks, that she was letting herself feel things that were far too fast and far too deep. But when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of amber eyes and gentle hands, and woke the next morning with a smile on her face. Sunday dawned bright and clear, and Katherine dressed with special care in her best day dress, a practical but becoming garment in sage green. Church services were well attended, and she was conscious of Vincent's presence several rows behind her, could feel his eyes on her during the hymns. Afterward, he met her on the steps as promised, and they walked together to where his horse was waiting. "I brought a different horse today," he explained, indicating a sturdy bay mare. "Daisy is gentler than Cisco, better for a long ride." He had also brought a proper side saddle, Katherine noticed, touched by his thoughtfulness. He helped her mount and settled her securely before swinging up behind her. This time she knew what to expect, knew to hold on as they headed out of town. and she found herself enjoying the ride in a way she had not been able to during that first desperate journey. Vincent guided them northwest, following trails that wound through the scrubby landscape. As they climbed gradually higher, the vegetation changed, becoming lusher, and Katherine could see the mountains rising more clearly ahead of them. After about an hour, Vincent turned off the main trail onto a smaller path that led through a grove of cottonwoods. "Almost there," he said, and she could hear the anticipation in his voice. They emerged into a small meadow that took Katherine's breath away. A creek ran through the center, lined with willows and wildflowers, and the grass was lush and green. The whole space was sheltered by trees and rocks, creating a private oasis that felt a world away from the harsh desert landscape they had ridden through. "Vincent, this is beautiful," Katherine breathed. "This is my favorite place on my land," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "When I bought the ranch, this meadow was the reason I said yes. I knew as soon as I saw it that I wanted to build something here." He spread a blanket in the shade and unpacked the lunch he had brought. Bread and cheese, cold chicken, apples, and a jar of what turned out to be his mother's famous peach preserves. They ate and talked, and the conversation felt even easier than it had at the dance, perhaps because they were alone and unobserved, free to simply be themselves. "Tell me about your family," Katherine said, biting into an apple. "You have mentioned them, but I want to know more." Vincent settled back on his elbows, looking up at the sky through the leaves. "My parents came here from New Mexico when I was 5, he said. They wanted to own land, real land, not just work someone else's ranch. My father is half Apache and my mother is Spanish and Mexican. It was not easy for them, finding a place that would accept them, but they persevered. They taught us to be proud of who we are, to work hard, and to never let anyone make us feel less than we are." Katherine heard the depth of love and respect in his voice. "They sound like remarkable people." "They are," Vincent said simply. "They gave us everything they could, made sure we all learned to read and write, taught us skills we could use to make our way in the world. I am the first in my family to own land in my own name, but it is because of them that I could do it." "You must have worked very hard," Katherine said. "I started working odd jobs when I was 12, Vincent said. "Every penny I could save, I saved. I worked cattle drives in the summers, hired myself out as a hand during branding and calving season. It took me 10 years, but I finally had enough for a down payment. The land was not much, mostly bare rock and scrub, but it had water and potential. I have been building it up ever since." "How long have you had it now?" 3 years. "It is starting to feel like something real, like something that will last." He turned his head to look at her. "What about you? What are your dreams?" Katherine was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I want to make a difference," she said finally. "I know that sounds idealistic, but I believe education can change lives. I have seen it. My father was the son of immigrants, and he educated himself through sheer determination. He wanted the same opportunities for me. Now I want to help give those opportunities to others." "That is not idealistic," Vincent said. "That is important." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the meadow, talking and laughing and simply enjoying each other's company. Vincent showed her where he planned to build his house someday, pacing out the dimensions with boyish enthusiasm. Katherine tried to picture it. A real home, solid and permanent, built in this beautiful place. She tried not to let herself imagine too vividly what it might be like to live in such a house, to wake up to this view every morning, to build a life in this meadow. But the images came anyway, unbidden and achingly sweet. On the ride back to town, Katherine found herself leaning more comfortably against Vincent's back, relaxed and content in a way she had not felt since before her father's death. When he left her at her door, He asked if he could see her again the following weekend, and she agreed without hesitation. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Vincent came to town every Saturday, and they would spend time together, sometimes at community events and sometimes alone. He showed her more of the area, took her riding through landscapes that ranged from harsh and beautiful desert to surprising green valleys. She learned the rhythms of his life, the constant work of ranching, the challenges of drought and predators and market prices, the satisfaction of seeing his herd grow and his land improve. For her part, Katherine found herself settling more deeply into the community. Her students thrived under her teaching, and she organized a spelling bee that became a major town event. She started a lending library in the schoolhouse, donating her own books and soliciting more from families. She hosted parent meetings and wrote detailed progress reports for each child. The work was exhausting but deeply satisfying, and through it all, her feelings for Vincent deepened. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day, looking forward to their time together with an anticipation that bordered on desperate. The way he smiled at her, the way he listened when she talked, the way his hand felt in hers when they walked together, all of it combined to create something that felt inevitable and right. It was Martha Henderson who finally said what Katherine had been thinking but not daring to speak aloud. They were having tea together one afternoon in late October, nearly 2 months after Katherine had arrived in Independence, and Martha had been giving her knowing looks all afternoon. "You are in love with him," Martha said finally, setting down her teacup with a definitive click. Katherine felt her cheeks flame. "I do not know what you mean." "Oh, please," Martha said, but kindly. "You get this look on your face whenever anyone mentions his name, and he is just as bad. He has barely looked at another woman since you arrived." "We have only known each other for 2 months," Katherine protested weakly. "My parents knew each other for 3 weeks before they married," Martha said. "When you know, you know. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do?" Katherine asked. "I cannot just throw myself at him. What if I am wrong? What if he does not feel the same way?" Martha gave her a look that suggested she was being deliberately obtuse. "Katherine, the man rides 2 hours into town every week just to see you. He looks at you like you hung the moon. I think it is safe to say he feels the same way." Katherine wanted to believe it. She wanted it so badly it was almost painful. But she had spent so much of her life being practical, being careful, that it was hard to let herself simply feel and hope. The crisis came in early November, though crisis was perhaps too dramatic a word for it. Vincent had been quiet all afternoon, distracted, and Katherine had been wondering if something was wrong. They had ridden out to his ranch, and he was showing her the progress he had made on fencing a new pasture when he suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence. "Katherine," he said, turning to face her. "I need to tell you something." Her heart sank. This was it, she thought. He was going to tell her he had been mistaken, that he valued her friendship but nothing more, that she should not have let herself hope for anything else. "All right," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have been offered a job," Vincent said. "Foreman position on a big ranch up north near the Oregon border. Good pay, steady work. It is the kind of opportunity most men would not turn down." Katherine felt like all the air had left her lungs. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," she managed. "It would be," Vincent said. "Except I do not want it. I do not want to leave my land, and I do not want to leave you." Hope flared in her chest, bright and terrifying. "Vincent, let me finish," he said, and she could see how nervous he was, how his hands trembled slightly as he reached for hers. "I know we have not known each other long. I know by all rights I should wait, should court you properly for a decent amount of time. But Katherine, I am not a patient man, and I know what I want. I want you. I want to build a life with you here on this land. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to build that house in the meadow and fill it with children and laughter and love." Katherine felt tears start to slide down her cheeks, but she was smiling too widely to care. "I want that too," she whispered. "I have wanted that almost from the moment I met you." Vincent let out a breath that was almost a laugh, relief and joy transforming his face. "Marry me then, be my wife, build this life with me." "Yes," Katherine said, and then louder, "Yes, yes, yes." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was everything she had dreamed it might be, tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time, giddy with happiness and relief. "I do not have a ring yet," Vincent said, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I wanted to ask before I presumed, but I promise I will get you one. I will get you the most beautiful ring I can find." "I do not need a ring," Katherine said. "I just need you." But Vincent insisted, and the following week he presented her with a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. They were married 3 weeks later, in the Independence Church with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Katherine wore a dress that Martha and Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, cream-colored with lace at the collar and cuffs. Vincent wore a new suit that his mother had brought up from their ranch, and when he turned to watch Katherine walk down the aisle, there were tears in his eyes. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Katherine's hand shook as Vincent slid the ring onto her finger, and her voice trembled as she spoke her vows, but the words came from the deepest part of her heart. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Vincent kissed her with such tender reverence that she felt like her heart might burst. The reception was held in the church hall, the same place where they had danced at the harvest celebration. There was food and music and dancing, and Katherine met Vincent's family for the first time. His parents were exactly as he had described them, warm and welcoming, with eyes that saw everything and hearts that seemed to have room for everyone. His sisters fussed over Katherine, claiming her as one of their own, and even Maria, the youngest, declared that Vincent had done well for himself. "Do not let him get too bossy," Maria advised in a whisper. "He thinks because he is older he knows everything, but he does not." "I will keep that in mind," Katherine said, laughing. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Vincent pulled her aside. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked, and the way he said home with such possessive warmth made her stomach flutter. "I am ready," she said. They had decided to spend their wedding night at the ranch, in the small cabin that Vincent had been living in while he worked the land. It was not much, he had warned her, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was clean and weatherproof and theirs. Tomorrow they would begin the real work of building their life together, but tonight was just for them. The ride to the ranch felt different from all the times Katherine had made it before. This time she was not a visitor but a wife, coming home to her own land. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was cold enough to make her grateful for Vincent's warmth at her back and the heavy cloak she wore. When they reached the cabin, Vincent insisted on carrying her over the threshold, even though she protested that it was silly and old-fashioned. "My mother would kill me if I did not," he said, swinging her up into his arms with ease. "And besides, I want to." Inside, the cabin was warm, a fire burning in the small stove. Someone, probably Vincent's mother and sisters, had been here earlier in the day. There were fresh flowers on the table, clean linens on the bed, and food laid out for a late supper. Katherine felt her throat tighten at the thoughtfulness of it. "Your family is wonderful," she said. "Our family now," Vincent corrected gently. He set her down and turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. "Are you happy, Katherine? Truly?" "Happier than I have ever been," she said honestly. "I keep thinking I should be scared that it all happened so fast, but I am not. I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to feel this way, to find you." "I feel the same," Vincent said. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I love you. I think I started loving you that first day when you were standing at that crossroads looking so determined not to cry. I thought you were the bravest thing I had ever seen." "I was terrified," Katherine admitted. "But you did not let the terror stop you," Vincent said. "You came all this way alone to chase your dream. That is bravery." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Katherine felt the last of her nervousness melt away. This was Vincent, her husband, the man she loved. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Their wedding night was everything it should be. Tender and passionate and a little awkward in the way of first times, but full of love and laughter and a growing sense of intimacy. Afterward, lying in Vincent's arms with her head on his chest, Katherine felt more at peace than she had in years. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For stopping that day. For offering me a ride home. For taking a chance on me." Vincent pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for saying yes, for trusting me, for being brave enough to build this life with me. Always," Katherine promised, "for the rest of our lives." The first months of their marriage were a time of adjustment and learning. Katherine continued to teach, rising before dawn to ride into town with Vincent and returning in the evenings. It was exhausting, but she loved her work too much to give it up, and Vincent never suggested that she should. Instead, he arranged his schedule to match hers whenever possible, finding work he could do closer to town on school days. In the spring, they broke ground on the house in the meadow. It would take time to complete, they knew, perhaps as much as 2 years, but Vincent wanted to do much of the work himself, to build their home with his own hands. Katherine spent her Saturdays helping him, learning skills she had never imagined she would need. How to mix mortar, how to cut and fit boards, how to think in 3 dimensions about space and structure. The work was hard but satisfying, and she loved seeing the house take shape gradually, growing from foundation to walls to the beginnings of a roof. Vincent's family came to help when they could, and community work parties became regular events, with neighbors pitching in for a day's labor in exchange for meals and the promise of reciprocal help when they needed it. By the time school let out for the summer, the house was nearly half finished, and Katherine was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks before she was certain, her body changing in small but unmistakable ways. When she finally told Vincent, on a warm June evening as they sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sunset, he was speechless with joy. He pulled her into his arms and held her for a long time, not saying anything, just breathing her in. "A baby," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Vincent said. He laid his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "How are you feeling? Are you all right? Should you still be riding? Maybe you should not be helping with the house anymore." "I am fine," Katherine said, laughing at his sudden anxiety. "Women have been having babies forever, Vincent. I am not made of glass." But he insisted on being extra careful with her anyway, treating her like precious china even as she rolled her eyes, and continued to do most of her normal activities. His mother and sisters were thrilled at the news, and they descended on Katherine with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and a seemingly endless supply of knitted items. The baby was born in early March, a cold night when the wind howled around the cabin, and Katherine labored for nearly 12 hours before their son finally made his appearance. Vincent's mother served as midwife, and through the pain and fear, Katherine held onto the sound of Vincent's voice in her ear, his hand gripping hers, his steady presence that never wavered. When the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Vincent wept openly. "A son," he said in wonder, holding the tiny bundle with infinite care. "We have a son." They named him Thomas Vincent Navarro, Thomas after Catherine's father and Vincent because she insisted their son should carry forward his father's name. Tommy, as they immediately began calling him, proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with strong lungs and his father's dark eyes. Katherine took the rest of the school year off, having arranged for a temporary replacement, and threw herself into motherhood with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She was exhausted and overwhelmed and deliriously happy, and Vincent was a devoted father who never complained about sleepless nights or endless diaper changes. By the time Tommy was 6 months old, the house in the meadow was finally finished. It was not large, just 4 rooms and a loft, but it was solid and well built and exactly what they needed. The day they moved in felt momentous, like they were finally stepping into the life they had been working toward all along. Katherine walked through each room, touching the walls that Vincent had built, looking out the windows at the view of the meadow and the mountains beyond. In the kitchen, there was a proper stove and cupboards Vincent had made himself. In the main room, there was a stone fireplace and built-in bookshelves already filling with books. The bedroom had a real bed frame and a cradle that Vincent's father had crafted. And everywhere there were little touches that spoke of love and care. A window seat where Katherine could read, hooks for Vincent's hat and coat, a special shelf for Tommy's growing collection of toys. "What do you think?" Vincent asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I think it is perfect," Katherine said, leaning back against him. "I think it is everything I dreamed of and more." That summer was one of the happiest times of Katherine's life. She had decided not to return to teaching for another year, wanting to focus on Tommy and the ranch, and she threw herself into learning everything she could about ranching life. She learned to keep chickens and maintain a garden, to preserve food for the winter and manage household accounts. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the endless cycle of work that kept them fed and clothed and secure. In the evenings, after Tommy was asleep, she and Vincent would sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing, or sometimes just sit in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Those quiet moments felt like the truest expression of their marriage, 2 people who had chosen each other, building a life one day at a time. Vincent's ranch continued to grow and prosper. The grazing lands supported a growing herd, and he began to develop a reputation for quality cattle. He hired occasional help during busy seasons, young men from town or drifters passing through who needed work. Katherine made sure they were well fed and fairly treated, and more than one young cowhand later said that working for the Navarros had set the standard for how he expected to be treated by employers. When Tommy was 2, Katherine had another baby, this time a daughter they named Grace Alina after Vincent's sister and mother. Grace was a quieter baby than Tommy had been, with her mother's dark hair and a thoughtful expression that made her seem wise beyond her months. Tommy adored his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes, and Katherine's heart overflowed watching her small family together. She returned to teaching that fall, bringing both children with her. The school board had agreed to let her arrange the schoolhouse to accommodate her babies, and the older students competed for the privilege of helping watch them during lessons. It was chaotic and exhausting, but Katherine loved it, loved being able to pursue her passion while still being present for her children. The years passed in a blur of work and growth and deepening love. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping his father with the cattle and following him everywhere. Grace proved to be a voracious reader like her mother, learning her letters at an impossibly young age. 2 more children followed, a second son named Samuel and then a third daughter named Rose. The ranch continued to expand, and Vincent's reputation grew beyond independence. He was asked to serve on the town council and helped organize a cooperative that allowed smaller ranchers to pool their resources for better market prices. Catherine's school became known throughout the region for the quality of its education, and she took on training other teachers who wanted to learn her methods. Through it all, through the hard times and the good times, through droughts and illness and the ordinary challenges of life, Katherine and Vincent's love remained the bedrock on which everything else was built. They still made time for each other, still found ways to steal moments alone. Vincent still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and Katherine still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Katherine back to the meadow where he had proposed, leaving the children with his parents for the night. They had a picnic on the same spot where they had eaten that first lunch together. And as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Vincent pulled her into his arms. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up your old life, tying yourself to a rancher in the middle of nowhere?" Katherine looked around at the meadow, at the house they had built together, at the land that had become so deeply home. She thought about her children, about the students she had taught over the years, about the community they had helped build. She thought about waking up next to Vincent every morning, about the way his hand still found hers in the night, about 10 years of laughter and tears and growing together. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. You are exactly who I am supposed to be with." "I waited my whole life for you," Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion. "That day at the crossroads, I felt like I had been riding toward you forever, and I just did not know it until I saw you there." "You saved me that day," Katherine said. "In more ways than one. I was lost and alone, and you took me home." "We took each other home," Vincent corrected. He kissed her as the last light faded from the sky, and Katherine felt the same leap of joy she had felt the first time he had kissed her, would feel every time he kissed her for the rest of their lives. The years continued to unfold. Tommy grew tall and serious, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch operations. Grace became a teacher herself, taking over the independent school when Katherine finally retired. Samuel showed an unexpected talent for mechanics and went off to Sacramento to learn engineering, though he came home often. Rose, the baby, proved to have her father's way with horses and became a renowned horse trainer. Vincent's hair turned silver at the temples, and Katherine found laugh lines etching themselves deeper around her eyes. Their hands grew gnarled with work, their bodies slower, but the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and more precious, tempered by years of shared experience and mutual support. On the day of their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Their 4 children and their spouses, a growing horde of grandchildren, Vincent's siblings and their families, friends from town and far beyond. Tables were set up in the meadow, groaning under the weight of food. Children ran shrieking through the grass, and the adults sat in groups talking and laughing. Katherine, now in her 60s, sat in a comfortable chair that Tommy had carried out for her, watching the celebration with deep contentment. Vincent sat beside her, his hand clasped in hers as it had been for 40 years, and she could see him taking it all in with the same satisfaction she felt. "We did well," he said softly, meant only for her ears. "We did," Katherine agreed. She looked at their children, grown and happy, at their grandchildren playing in the same meadow where she and Vincent had first declared their love. She thought about the school that still bore her name, about the ranch that had grown from hardscrabble acres to a thriving operation, about the community they had helped build and sustain. But more than any of that, she thought about the man beside her, the cowboy who had stopped at a crossroads for a stranded woman and ended up giving her the life she had always dreamed of. She thought about 40 years of waking up beside him, of building a home and a family, of weathering storms and celebrating joys. Grace came over with her youngest son, a 3-year-old named Vincent after his grandfather. "Grandpa, will you tell us the story?" she asked. "About how you and Grandma met." Vincent looked at Katherine, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Again? I swear I have told this story 100 times. Please." Little Vincent climbed into his grandfather's lap, snuggling against his chest. "I love that story." "Well," Vincent began, his voice taking on the cadence of a well-worn tale. "It all started on a hot September day in 1872. I was riding back from checking the grazing lands when I came to a crossroads, and standing there in the dust, looking fierce and determined and beautiful, was your grandmother." Katherine smiled, listening to him tell the story. She could still see it so clearly in her mind, the empty road, the failing light, the desperation she had felt. And then the sound of hoofbeats, and a stranger who had offered her more than just a ride. He had offered her a home, a life, a love that had lasted 4 decades and counting. More grandchildren gathered around, drawn by the story they all loved. Vincent continued, his voice warm and engaging, embellishing the details in the way he always did. Katherine let her gaze wander over the assembled family, over the land that had become so deeply theirs, over the house in the meadow that had sheltered so many years of happiness. She thought about the Katherine she had been at 22, standing at that crossroads alone and scared. She wanted to reach back through time and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the man on the horse riding toward her in the fading light was bringing everything she had ever wanted, even things she had not known to want. She wanted to tell her that sometimes the best moments in life come when your plans fall apart, when you are stranded and desperate, and a stranger offers you a ride home. Sometimes the detours and the delays and the disappointments are really just the universe rearranging things so you end up exactly where you are meant to be. And then, what happened? One of the younger grandchildren asked breathlessly. "Then I said, 'Hop on, I will take you home,'" Vincent said, his eyes finding Katherine's across the circle of children. "And I did. I took her home, and she has been the best part of my home ever since." "That is so romantic," one of the teenage granddaughters sighed. "It was," Katherine said, speaking up for the first time. "But the real romance was not in that one moment. It was in every day that came after. It was in choosing each other over and over again, in building this life together one day at a time." "The romance was in the work," Vincent agreed. "In the partnership. In knowing that whatever came, we would face it together." As the sun began to set over the meadow, painting everything in that familiar golden light, the family gradually dispersed to continue the celebration. But Vincent and Katherine stayed where they were, hands clasped, watching their legacy unfold around them. "I love you," Katherine said softly. "I have loved you from that first day, and I will love you until my last day." "And I love you," Vincent said. "My Katherine, my wife, my home." They sat together in the fading light, two people who had once been strangers at a crossroads and had become everything to each other. The party continued around them, full of life and laughter and love, the sounds of family and joy echoing across the meadow. And Katherine thought about how it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy stopping for a stranded woman and offering her a ride. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the long road from that dusty crossroads, this moment of perfect contentment. She had waited for a ride that never came, and instead had been given something infinitely better. A man who had taken her home and then made that home a place of such love and beauty that it exceeded every dream she had ever dared to dream. The stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had shone on their wedding night, on the night each of their children was born, on thousands of ordinary evenings that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. And as Katherine sat beside her husband, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had nurtured, she knew that she was exactly where she belonged, exactly where she had always been meant to be, home.